That was very political of you, but I think the question is how did they add these guys, the LTR special? If Stone comes back game one, what are you saying if you're another franchise that might have to play these guys game one? But game one, if Stone's back and everybody's back, they're playing with a roster that's $10 million over.
Doesn't matter. It's within the rules.
And going back to when Tampa Bay, Cooch did miss the entire season with a legitimate injury. I'm not saying Stone doesn't have a legitimate injury, but if he comes back game one, it just looks extremely suspicious. Am I crazy here? Help me out, you people at home. Am I crazy? Does this not look suspicious?
You're not crazy, Biz. It does look suspicious. The Mark Stone injury timeline has been in the limelight ever since Vegas announced that he would be placed on LTIR just 2 weeks before the NHL trade deadline, which is exactly what happened last season when the same Golden Knights placed Mark Stone on LTIR 2 weeks before the trade deadline. This allowed them to pick up excellent depth pieces like Ivan Barbashev, Teddy Bluger, and Jonathan Quick at the deadline, en route to their first ever Stanley Cup win. And they did that with a healthy Mark Stone, who was conveniently ready to go for Game 1 of the playoffs. I've seen a lot of fans call for the NHL to work towards closing this loophole, but unfortunately for them, I honestly don't see an easy way to prevent this from happening again. Let me explain. To understand why this alleged loophole even exists, we first need to understand what it even is. The NHL has a fixed salary cap in the regular season, and for this season, this cap was set at $83.5 million. But if a player gets injured for an extended duration of time, that player can be placed on the LTIR, or the long-term injured reserve. This allows for the player's cap hit to not count against the team's salary cap. So in our example, Vegas was able to free up $9 million of Mark Stone's cap hit by placing him on the LTIR. And the intent of this rule, I think, is good. If you're going to be without a player for an extended period, you should be able to replace that player with players of an equivalent cap hit. It gives teams who lose star players a chance to remain competitive by adding additional depth. And when that injured player is healthy and ready to come back to the lineup, the team needs to move salary caps around to ensure that the team is cap compliant when it hits the ice. But that's where the trouble begins, because in the playoffs, there is no salary cap. So if that injured player returns to the lineup during the playoffs instead of the regular season, the team doesn't need to make any adjustments at all and can ice a roster that's over the salary cap. And that's essentially what the loophole is. It's a way to temporarily ice a roster that's potentially millions of dollars over the salary cap. And it's been put to good use by multiple teams in the past, not just by Vegas. Back in 2015, the Chicago Blackhawks placed Patrick Kane on LTIR after he fractured his collarbone just a week before the NHL trade deadline. His estimated return was sometime during the Western Conference Finals, if the Hawks were to make it that far. This allowed GM Stan Bowman to add 3 players at the trade deadline using the additional cap space created by Kane's injury, which included Antoine Vermette, who was one of the better defensive forwards in the league, and a veteran Kimmo Timonen, who provided much-needed depth on the back end. And when Game 1 of the 2015 playoffs rolled around, Patrick Kane was healthy and ready to go, putting the Hawks more than $6 million over the salary cap. But it didn't matter, because there is no salary cap in the playoffs. The bolstered Chicago Blackhawks would eventually go on to win the Stanley Cup, beating the Tampa Bay Lightning in 6 games. Patrick Kane would lead the Hawks in scoring, putting up a team-high 11 goals and 23 points in 23 games. And to top it all off, Antoine Vermette, whose acquisition was only made possible because of Kane's injury, would end up scoring 3 game-winning goals. This included an OT winner in the Western Conference Finals against the Ducks and 2 game-winning goals in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Lightning. After the playoffs were over, the Lightning proposed a vote to end the salary cap loophole that helped the Blackhawks go over the salary cap, and 0 teams joined the Lightning in this cause, all 29 voting no. And funnily enough, the Lightning said, "F it, if you can't beat them, join them." Because 6 years later, the very same Tampa Bay Lightning, who were the only team who voted to close this loophole, would reap the benefits as Nikita Kucherov would miss the entire regular season due to a hip surgery and subsequently spend the entire regular season on the LTIR. This would open up Nikita Kucherov's $9.5 million cap hit and allow GM Julien Brisebois to acquire one of the most coveted assets at the deadline in David Savard. And once again, just like the Patrick Kane situation in 2015, Nikita Kucherov would rise up like the Undertaker and play in every playoff game for the eventual Stanley Cup winning Tampa Bay Lightning. And once again, just like the Patrick Kane situation in 2015, He would also end up leading his team and the entire league in playoff scoring. This would also give us some of the greatest memes in recent years, with Kucherov sporting a shirt that said $18 million over the cap, and a drunk and shirtless press conference which will go down in history books as one of the greatest of all time.
From the Lightning, we have Nikita Kucherov. If you have a question, we'll start with Joe Smith, The Athletic.
Joe, let's hear it. I don't know what to say. And then last year, they gave Vezina to somebody else. Number one bull. Vassy took both cups. I didn't want to go back to Montreal, but they acted, the fans in Montreal, come on. They acted like they won the Stanley Cup last game. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
And that brings us to the Vegas Golden Knights and Mark Stone, where 3 seasons in a row, Mark Stone has been placed on LTIR just before the NHL trade deadline and activated for Game 1 of the playoffs each time. This has allowed Vegas to add pieces like Ivan Barbashev and Teddy Bluger last year, helping them win the Stanley Cup for the first time in franchise history. All while Mark Stone played every single playoff game. And at this year's deadline, Vegas went all out, acquiring genuine all-stars of the league like Noah Hannafin and Thomas Hertl, thanks to the cap space created by Mark Stone's injury. And wouldn't you know it, Mark Stone was ready to go for Game 1 of this year's playoffs against the Dallas Stars, and he made his presence felt early.
Off to Eichel, feeds the point, there's Hannafin. Long wrist shot, score! Deflected in front, guess who? It's the captain, it looks like, Mark Stone! Welcome back, Mark Stone, and welcome to Game 1 of Vegas and Dallas.
Given the timeline of Stone's injuries and his returns, I can understand why fans feel that Vegas is cheating the salary cap system, because it seems very convenient that Stone becomes Mr. Made of Glass at the trade deadline every year, only to become Mr. Made of Stone when the playoffs come around. Fans have even questioned if these injuries are legitimate in the first place. But that's a myth I think can be safely debunked, considering numerous insiders have reported that Stone's injuries have never been falsified. These long-term injuries are also often independently verified by the league to make sure the team physicians aren't artificially keeping players off the active roster until the playoffs start. The truth is, Stone is probably playing slightly injured at the moment, at least injured enough to warrant him staying on LTIR before the end of the regular season. But come playoff time, we've seen hockey players play through unthinkable injuries to help their team win the cup. And unfortunately, that comes at a hefty price, as we've seen several players come out and talk about how they overused painkillers like Toradol. But that's a conversation for another day. So if these injuries are in fact legitimate, what can even be done to close this loophole? Is it even a loophole? If it's doing its job by giving teams with injured players a chance to remain competitive? Well, the most popular solution to this has been to continue to enforce the salary cap in the playoffs. That almost seems like a no-brainer solution to this problem. But as recently as the GM meetings in March of this year, only one GM brought up this solution as an option to close this loophole. That being Jim Nill of the Dallas Stars, who funnily enough is the team that's been rewarded with playing against this stacked Vegas roster in the first round, despite being the #1 seed in the West. Well, one of the main reasons why the cap doesn't extend into the playoffs is because the salary cap is tied to player compensation, and the player's last paycheck comes at the end of the regular season. They don't get paid their regular salaries in the playoffs. Instead, players get a playoff bonus depending on how far they advance. And that's exactly why I don't think this loophole will be closed anytime soon. Because to make any changes, it needs to be done when the next CBA is negotiated, which doesn't happen till 2026. And even then, GMs and owners across the league have repeatedly stated that they do not think this is cheating, and that this is a bigger issue in the media than it is to them. At the end of the day, until the owners or the GMs of the league consider this to be a problem in the NHL, nothing will likely change. As much as us fans like to complain about teams gaining an advantage thanks to the LTIR, it's a luxury afforded to every team, and the GMs and owners know that. Because one day, their team could be the one who loses a star player for an extended period of time. And most teams do use the LTIR to their advantage. This year alone, of the teams that made the playoffs, 9 of them currently take advantage of the LTIR, and 7 of those 9 teams would hypothetically exceed the salary cap if their players return to full health. So as much as I would love to join in and hate on Vegas, They aren't breaking any rules, and that seems to be the common consensus across the leadership of the NHL as well. I do think there's room for more conversation around somehow enforcing a game day salary cap that all teams must comply with, regular season or playoffs. But as of now, it doesn't seem like it's at the top of the list of concerns for the people making the decisions at the top, which is why I'm not overly optimistic about a change coming around anytime soon. What do you think about this loophole? Do you still think what Vegas is doing is cheating? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.